For those who do not know, I wear the yellow clothing of shame and the yellow star in honor of the Jews, of all those persecuted, murdered, pillaged, and raped by the Christians in the name of Jesus Christos. I stand with these people, and I do not stand with the Christians. And may the Jews find redemption in the last days. May they find vengeance for all the things that have been done to them for the last nearly 2,000 years. I read an article today after the embassy in Jerusalem has finally been opened. We've waited too long for this. Waited far too long. We've had many presidents of the United States that turned out to be absolute liars. And I'm not going to go over that right now. What I'm going to go over are the lies by those who have made merchandise out of you, the people, the gullible people, who would not read the Bibles for themselves, but insisted that others read it for them, and thereby making yourselves vulnerable to be made merchandise out of. And it is written. It is written about in. I will go to the Bible, and I will point this out. And the only way they can make merchandise out of you is if you do not do your own studying. Second Peter. I might read New International Version, maybe. 2 Peter 2. Second Peter 2. We'll start in verse 1. Just like that there were false prophets among the people of Israel in the past, so shall there be false teachers among you, who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign master who bought them. The sovereign. You know, this is the problem with all these different translations. Sovereign, that would be the Father. He is over all. And yes, He did buy. It is He that purchased them. And in so doing, by denying the Father, they bring swift destruction on themselves. Many will follow their depraved conduct and will bring the way of truth into disrepute. Now, you know, that's not hard to understand, folks. Peter, he understated that. Not that he said anything wrong, but it was far, far worse than maybe what the people have heard it, from what he said anyway. In their greed, these teachers will exploit you with fabricated stories. Their condemnation has been hanging over them, and their destruction has not been sleeping. So I'll go back to King James Version. But there shall be false prophets among the people, or just as there were false prophets among the people, which meant the people of Israel, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privately will bring in damnable heresies, even denying the one that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of the truth shall be evil spoken of. Now, how many times have I gone over the truth? Romans 11, 25 through 27. All Israel shall be saved. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. The new covenant. The new covenant is for the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And Paul emphasizes it by repeating it in Hebrews 8, verses 8 through 12. And what has happened? What has happened is this. Verse 2, and many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. Yes, they cast the truth aside, and they spoke evil of the truth. They spoke evil of the new covenant being for Israel and Yehudah. They spoke evil of the branches of Israel. Why would they do this? Why? Through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise out of you. Yes, they took your money. They took your money by writing these books, by demanding tithes at the pulpit, and by the pain of death. They did. Whose judgment now for a long time lingers not, and their damnation slumbers not. So, making merchandise. Let me show you this particular article here. It's on the American Vision website, and the article is written by Dr. Gary North, who, it appears that he might be another one of those book writers. Let's find out. Yes, Gary North. Gary Kilgore North, born in 1942, is an American paleo-libertarian writer, Austrian school economic historian, and leading figure in the Christian Reconstructionist movement. North has authored and co-authored over 50 books on topics including Reformed Protestant theology, economics, and history. Now, I'm not saying that it's a sin to write books. What I am saying is that Peter condemned. He condemned with damnation those who made merchandise out of the people and spoke evil of the truth. Now that we know what this man is, when we read his article, we will get some understanding as to where he's coming from. In no way am I claiming that any of what he is saying is the truth. What I'm going to do is remark on his comments as we go along, because it's a long article. So, here's what he says. Today is the 70th anniversary of the political creation of the State of Israel. This fact is crucial for American fundamentalists. This is because most of them believe in something their pastors call the clock of prophecy. Well, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I have never heard of the clock of prophecy until I read this article. Believe it or not. Never heard of it. So I'm learning a few new things about how these guys have tricked the masses today. It started ticking on May 14th, 1948, or so they have been told by a generation of pastors and authors, but there is a problem. It was not supposed to keep ticking longer than 70 years, the normal lifespan of one generation. Well, there is a problem with the way he calculated a generation. When we read in the book of Genesis, when Jehovah was speaking to Abraham, it was in Genesis 15. We'll go to verse 16. Verse 12, and when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that your seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Remember that as we continue to read. 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance, and you shall go to your fathers in peace, and they shall be buried, you shall be buried in a good old age, but in the 4th generation they shall come here again. 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals what? 4. 100 plus 100 plus 100 plus 100 equals what? 400. You see, a generation is 100 years. Have these guys not even bothered to read the Bible at all? I mean, this is simple, folks. Even a child could understand it if that a 3rd grader could understand it. And you're telling me that people with doctorates behind their names, educated many years in seminaries, cannot even understand the basic numerology of a generation? Unbelievable. So he calls 70 years the normal lifespan of one generation. Well, strike that one as wrong. Before I explain all this, I'm quoting him again. I want you to understand that the American fundamentalists are almost all dispensationalists. I don't even know what a dispensationalist is. Maybe it's time for me to go look. Never heard of it. Wikipedia. Belief in a system of historical progression as revealed in the Bible, consisting of a series of stages in God's self-revelation and plan of salvation. And I guess that is why they screwed up the numerology and the math in Daniel 9. We'll get to that in just a minute. I mean, why do they have to come up with these labels? I don't get this. All right, I will continue. I guess what he's trying to say is pre-tribulation rapture people. Okay. That must be what he's doing. They believe that Christians will be pulled out of history prior to the horror known as the Great Tribulation, which will come mainly on the Jews living in the state of Israel after the rapture. Really? Wow. You talk about blindness. It's unbelievable. American fundamentalists' 70-year unwavering political support for the state of Israel has been based on the doctrine of the rapture. And what if they're not raptured? Interesting. The rapture is the term that fundamentalists use to describe the supernatural transfer of residency for all living Christians from earth to heaven without death as the gate of passage. This essence of belief can be summarized by a variation of famous go directly to jail card in the board game Monopoly, go directly to heaven, do not pass death. Christians would thereby cheat the collectors, the mortgage lenders, credit card debt, and even college debt. Above all, their heirs would evade morticians. The rapture was to have taken place no later than 2011, according to popular dispensationalism interpretation of Bible prophecy. All Christians were to have been pulled out of history into heaven. The Great Tribulation for Jews in Palestine was to have begun then. And I quote this guy, Jesus and his angels should have returned yesterday. Oh, I get what he's saying. Yesterday, the day before the 70 year. To set up a one-world Christian government run by immortal Christians accompanying Jesus. It didn't happen. Popular dispensationalism now has a major theological problem to answer. It is also a practical problem. It is also a psychological problem. For the last 70 years, the popular interpretation of the Bible prophecy among dispensationalists have been the clock of prophecy began ticking again on May 14, 1948. It had 70 years to run. The clock had stopped. Now what? The clock of prophecy. What is the clock of prophecy? It is a metaphor. The Bible does not speak of such a clock. So, me personally, my question is, if the Bible doesn't speak of such a clock, then why are you calling it a clock of prophecy? Kind of like, it just reminds me of Easter, pagan holidays, that Christians keep thinking that they're somehow pleasing the Creator. Really? There is no clock of prophecy written in the Bible. What is written is the year of vengeance, the year of redemption of Israel. It is a special year. The idea was invented by dispensational theologians about a century ago. It has to do with the prophecy by, as he says, Jesus in Matthew chapter 24 regarding grim things that he described as taking place in Judea before he returns to judge the world. So he's quoting Yeshua, not Jesus. There is no such thing as Jesus. Okay, so his quote is, when you shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Then let them which in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return to take back his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray you that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be the great tribulation. That's not what it says. For then shall be great tribulation. And I'm quoting here. Such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days be shortened, there shall no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Now, before we continue any further, let me remind you that not only was Jerusalem trampled underfoot for 42 months by the Gentiles, but Israel's tribulation continued after the 3.5 years. This is where the preachers have gone off the track. And because they insist that the tribulation, Israel's tribulation, had to be exactly 3.5 years, that another 3.5 years is yet to come. That's not true. Did we just read in here that Israel's tribulation is going to be 3.5 years? Nope. Yet, it is written in Revelation, was it 11? Yes, 11, that because of the fact the Gentiles trampled Jerusalem underfoot for 42 months, so the Gentiles are going to receive plagues of every kind, including no rain for 42 months, or 1,203 score days, if you just want to go and look. But Israel's tribulation never stopped. It never stopped. Those who say that Israel has not experienced great tribulation, such as never. It's already happened, folks. It's what happened to Israel, what happened to the Jews, is nothing like the world has ever seen before. Nothing. What the Christians have done, what the Romans have done in 67 AD to 70 AD, and then what Constantine did, once again Roman, from his days all the way to 1945, what the Christians have done to the Israelites has never been done to anybody else. It is the worst persecution ever known to mankind. And that is why I wear this, folks. And except those days be shortened, in other words, if that weren't eventually stopped, then no flesh could be saved. Why? Because if Israel isn't saved, nobody's going to be saved. How do I come up with that conclusion? It says, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Who are the elect? The elect is Israel. The elect are the ones that are going to be given the new covenant, the house of Israel and the house of Judah. If this were allowed to continue, there would be no hope for mankind. If the days were not shortened, what does that mean? If Jehovah, our Father in heaven, didn't put a stop to it and did not put Yeshua Messiah on the throne in Jerusalem, there would be no flesh saved at all, because the Christians would eventually exterminate the Jews. Now, people will say, well, isn't it Iran? Isn't it the Muslims that are trying to exterminate the Jews? You know what the Muslim religion is? It is one more Protestant religion that came off the Catholic Church. Go read about it. Muhammad was raised by Christian monks. So I will continue. This, he said, would take place in what he said was this generation. Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and puts forth his leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you see all these things, know that it is even to the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass until all these things be fulfilled. What things? Vengeance on that generation. It happened. It did. The destruction of Jerusalem happened. Those who say, oh, it has yet to happen, you are delusional. Let me explain to you what delusion means. The word delusional is characterized by holding idiosyncratic beliefs or impressions that are contradicted by reality or rational argument, typically as a symptom of, are you ready for this, folks? A mental disorder. So what I'm saying is that those who insist that Israel has to suffer another destruction of the temple, you are delusional. You're mentally ill. You are brainwashed. I'm going to go back to this article. So, as you can see, I'm pointing out the faults in not only the dispensationalist views, but also the faults in this writer's views. I hope you're keeping up with this. It is obvious that this did not take place literally during the lifetime of those people who were listening to him. Really? Obviously, Mr. What is his name? I done forgot what his name was. The writer of this article is delusional. It sure did. It sure did. In fact, it happened approximately 70 years after Christians claim that the anointed one was killed. Well, somebody's got some explaining to do. And yet, a generation is 100 years. Dispensational theologians say that Bible prophecies must be interpreted literally. Therefore, they reject the church's ancient interpretation that, as he said, Jesus' prophecy referred to the fall of Jerusalem. So he's pointing out the dispensationalists claim that the prophecy that they reject, Yeshua was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So the dispensationalists are dead wrong on this. Dispensational theologians have argued that the prophecy of the Great Tribulation was not meant to be for those listening to him. Really? Really, dispensationalists? Wow. So you reject the truth, speak evil of the truth. Even when after history shows that it's happened, they still speak evil of the truth and make merchandise out of you. This warning applied to a future generation, they claim. It applied to the generation that would be alive when literal events had to take place. That's, once again, delusion. And you know what delusion is. That's a mental disorder. It did take place. So they argue that the clock of prophecy stopped ticking sometime before the end of the 1st century AD, but because of the dispensationalists' self-proclaimed literalism, the clock would have to start ticking again in order to allow for a literal fulfillment of that warning. The generation of Jews alive when the clock starts ticking would be this generation of Jews whom he was warning about. All right? So, as y'all can see by now, I have just destroyed the dispensationalists' delusion that somehow the 3.5-year destruction of Jerusalem has not come yet. And if the dispensationalists were literalists, they would agree that it did happen from early 67 AD to the fall of 70 AD, 3.5 years. So after May 14, 1948, a growing number of dispensational preachers and authors began to, notice he says authors, began to identify that date as the date when, as they say, Jesus, but that name is a fake name, Yeshua intended his prophecy to begin applying. Well, remember, he said this generation will not pass away. 70 years, and it happened. So they began to use the phrase, the clock of prophecy. It was said to have begun ticking in the advent of the state of Israel. This interpretation of the clock of prophecy was so common prior to 1988, when the 40 years associated with one generation ran out, that it had sold millions of books. Here we go with the books, folks. Hal Lindsey's book, The Late Great Planet Earth, I didn't know he wrote it in 1970. I never saw the book. Sold over 35 million copies. Boy, he fattened his bank account, didn't he? He and his long-term ghostwriter, Carol C. Carlson, were quite explicit. A generation in the Bible is something like 40 years. If this is a correct deduction, then within 40 years or so of 1948, all these things could take place. Many scholars who have studied Bible prophecy all their lives believe that this is so. The most important sign in Matthew has been the restoration of the Jews to the land in the rebirth of Israel. Even the figure of speech fig tree has a historical symbol of national Israel. And it does. When the Jewish people, after nearly 2,000 years of exile under relentless persecution, became a nation again, notice what he said? Did you miss that? Or did you catch it? What did I just say a few minutes ago? That the world never had seen before, or will never see again, what was done to the Jews for nearly 2,000 years. Didn't I say that? Oh, look, he's admitting to it and doesn't even know it. When the Jewish people, after nearly 2,000 years of exile under relentless persecution, you see, folks, there never has been a persecution like there has against the Jews by the Christians. Became a nation again on 14th of May, 1948. The fig tree put forth its first leaves. Yeshua said that this would indicate that he was at the door ready to return. And then he said, truly I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all these things take place. So, before I continue any further, let me go to Revelation 24:34 and make sure, did I say Revelation? Matthew 24:34. Starting in verse 32. Now learn a parable of the fig tree when its branch is tender and puts forth leaves, and you know that summer is near. So likewise, when you see these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. What is he talking about here? Well, look, you see, folks, he said these things. That's plural. So, when he talks about the desolator Rome coming in, trampling over Jerusalem, he was talking about that generation shall not pass away until that is fulfilled. Could it be also when he was talking about immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall sun and moon shall be, let's see. First of all, let me read verse 28, because that's how you're going to know. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered. What's that all about? Ezekiel 39, read it. It's the Ezekiel 38 war. Okay, now verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be dark, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, in the sky. And then shall all the tribes of the earth, yay, Messiah. No, they won't. They're going to mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the cloud of heaven with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels with the sound of a trumpet. And they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Read Isaiah 60. It's about the regathering of all Israel. Israel is the elect. All right? Now learn a lesson of the fig tree. When its branch is yet tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So likewise, when you shall see all these things, know that it is near. So when you see the sign of the tribulation, which was the Roman invasion of Jerusalem, know that it is near, even at the door. And when you see the sign of the sun be darkened and the moon not giving her light, and the stars fall from heaven, shall be shaken, and all of that, then know that it is near, even at the door. Now, it says, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. He was speaking of two different time frames, folks. One was the destruction of Jerusalem, and one was the regathering of Israel. And he did talk about the fig tree and when you see that fig tree putting forth its leaves. But you see, folks, a generation is not 70 years. It's 100 years. Oops. Now, let's continue. So he says, what generation? Obviously, in context, a generation that would see the signs, chief among them, rebirth of Israel. Again, he was talking about two different time frames, two different generations, two different subject matters. Once again, the generation that would experience the beginning of Israel's tribulation, the destruction of Jerusalem, and the generation of Israel that would receive or would see their redemption about to take place. Two different time frames, two different subject matters, two different generations. So he says, what generation? Obviously, in context, a generation would see the signs, chief among them, the rebirth of Israel. Generation in the Bible is something like 40 years. If this is a correct deduction, then within 40 years or so of 1948, all these things could take place. Many scholars who have studied the Bible prophecy all their lives believe that this is so. I don't know what PP 53 and 54. I have no idea what that is. It must be a book, pages. So they go from a generation being 70 now to 40. When we just read it's 100 years. Wow. So it says he reinforced this in his book, then 1980's Countdown to Armageddon, 1980, which sold 20 million copies. On page 8, he wrote, the decade of the 1980s could well be the last decade of history as we know it. The next year, he and Carlson wrote Hope to the Terminal Generation. He hedged his bets with the evasive could be, but his book did not sell over 60 million copies based upon could be. The readers understood what he was saying by tying the fulfillment of, as he said, Jesus' prophecy to May 14, 1948. They read, will be. Chuck Smith, pastor of Megachurch Calvary Chapel in Southern California, began his ministry in the same era that Lindsay began his a few miles away. In the early 1960s, he was a major promoter of the May 14, 1948 date marker. He wrote a book 6 years after late great planet Earth. His book was entitled The Soon-to-be-Revealed Antichrist. Now, as I have mentioned before, this soon-to-be-revealed Antichrist is actually, wait for it, folks, Israel's true Messiah. That's right. Because you see, the man of sin actually started back with Constantine, who took over the church and brought in all these horrendous doctrines and continued the acts of Nero, Vespasian, and Titus, the Roman generals, to persecute and pillage and plunder the Jews all these years in the name of Jesus Christos, a false name, false God, false anointed one. And so these people view the Israel's coming Messiah, the true Messiah, Yeshua Messiah, as the Antichrist. Now, I will continue with this here. So he says, if I understand scriptures correctly, Yeshua taught us that the generation which sees the budding of the fig tree, the birth of the nation of Israel, will be the generation that sees the Lord's return, as he says. I believe that the generation of 1948 is the last generation, since the generation of judgment is 40 years and the tribulation period lasts 7 years. No, it doesn't. There's no way no. The tribulation did not last 7 years. It lasted nearly 2,000 years. The tribulation that Israel will be saved from. This is so bad, folks. I can't even continue. Now you know the reason, folks. What I'm getting at is now you know the reason why you find yourself unable to read the Bible after listening to these guys. After listening to college-educated theologians, seminary-educated people who were taught to do one thing: to confuse you so they can make you believe that just like you cannot understand your taxes, you got to pay somebody else to do it for you. And they took your money, they lied to you, they swindled you. They not only swindled you out of your money, but they have swindled you out of your salvation. How did they do this? They did this by claiming that, it's somewhere down in here, that somehow the church replaces Israel. And they did this. One of the ways that they did this was once again by abusing the words of Paul. Galatians 6 verse 16. As many as walk according to this rule, peace be on them, and mercy. So he's talking about, that's to any Gentile, okay? Any Gentile that walks according to this rule, peace be on them and mercy. What was this rule? The rule was this. In verse 11 he says, you see how large a letter I have written unto you with my own hand, and many as desire to make a show of the flesh. In the flesh, they constrain you, or they force you to be circumcised. You've got to remember, folks, the Corinthians were Gentiles. They were not Israelites. They were not to be circumcised. So people were forcing them to be circumcised, only lest they should suffer persecution of Yeshua Messiah. For neither they themselves who are circumcised keep the law, because they couldn't keep the law, but they desire to have you circumcised, that you may glory in your flesh. But Jehovah forbid that I should glory except on the stake of our Master Yeshua Messiah, on whom the world is crucified unto me, and I unto the world. For in Yeshua Messiah neither is circumcision avails anything, nor uncircumcision, but a new creature. Now, for as many as walk according to this rule, peace be upon them and mercy. Now he's talking about the Gentiles, because he was talking to the Gentiles. But notice what he also says. And also upon Israel of Jehovah. So what they have done is they have taken this particular portion of this verse, of that sentence that Paul said, and try to apply it to the Gentile church. When Paul, in Romans 11, clarified his very statement about the Israel of Jehovah. Romans 11. Verse 25, for I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel. Why? So that until the fullness of the Gentiles is finished. Until the time of the Gentiles is finished. And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. As concerning the gospel, he's talking to the Romans, Israel is our enemies for your sakes. But as touching the election, they are the beloved for the patriarch's sakes. They are beloved of Jehovah for the patriarch's sakes. In other words, Israel is of Jehovah. You see? For the gifts of calling of Jehovah cannot be changed. You see, they are Israel of Jehovah. So when Paul was talking about peace be unto all you Gentiles who keep this rule, but also peace and mercy upon Israel of Jehovah, he meant Israel. And yet the churches stole that. Thieves tried to steal that from Israel. Tried to take that away. Remove it from Israel. It wasn't enough to have mercy and peace for themselves. They had to take it away from Israel too, which is why the tribulation is coming on the Gentiles. Now, going back to Daniel 9. I have done this so many times, folks. Guess I have to do it one more time. Daniel 9. You got to remember, this was translated from Hebrew to several languages to eventually English. All right, so Daniel was praying for Israel in sackcloth. And if he'd be living today, he would also have the yellow star on him for what the Romans have done to Israel all these years. So he's calling upon Jehovah to save Israel and the city of Jerusalem, not because we deserve it. No, because we have sinned, but for his mercy's sake, for his reputation's sake, so that the Gentiles would not call Jehovah a liar, which is what they are doing right now by claiming that the church is somehow now Israel. By doing that, they are calling our Father in heaven a liar. Shameful, shameful thing to do. So he's saying, verse 18, O my Elohim, incline your ear and hear, and open your eyes, and behold our desolations, and the city which is called by your name, for we do not present our supplications before you for our righteousness. No. But for your great mercies. O Jehovah, hear. O Jehovah, forgive. O Jehovah, hearken and do, and defer not. For your own sake, O my Elohim, and for your city and your people that are called by your name. You Christians, if you were for real, if you were sincere, you would be praying like Daniel did for Israel and for Jerusalem. And pray for the forgiveness of the people of Israel. Not because we, Israel, yes, I include myself, because I am a Jew. Not because we deserve it, but for Jehovah's holy name's sake. For his reputation's sake. So Gabriel comes, verse 20, and while I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before Jehovah, my Elohim, for the holy mountain of my Elohim, Yes, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation, and he informed me and talked with me, and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give you skill and understanding at the beginning of your supplication. The commandment came forth, and I am come to show you, for you are greatly beloved. And those of you who pray for Israel, who pray for Jerusalem, and ask Jehovah to forgive the people of Israel, and have mercy upon Jerusalem, you too can be greatly beloved, even if you are a Gentile. Verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sin, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, when you look in Strong Concordance, it appears to be talking about the reappointing of the most holy place. Now, the thing about it is, though, that goes hand in hand with bringing the kingdom to Jerusalem. It does. Right? Know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince, not Messiah the suffering servant. Listen carefully. Unto Messiah the Prince when he receives his crown. Why do I say that? Isn't he a prince now? Was he a prince before he was killed? No. No, he was not. He was a suffering servant. He was not a prince. So, the 7 sevens, what is it? Yeah, the 7 sevens is at the time of the end. So you have to move that out of the way. Because the times will just go, and when I say move it out of the way, I mean for a moment. And I will get to that in just a minute. So that's the time of the end. The 7 sevens, that's 49 years, not 7 years. You see. So the time frame portion of the time of the all the way at the end, when Messiah the Prince comes, is 7 sevens. The call to rebuild Jerusalem. Did somebody make that call in this age? Yes. It was in 1967. June 7, 1967. On what day? Shavuot. Shavuot. And it happened when the IDF took East Jerusalem from Jordan. Many times I have repeated what Shlomo Goren, the general of the IDF, said. In Jerusalem, as in the Jerusalem of old, today rebuild. That's what he said in Hebrew. So the call did go out. So you have to start counting 49 years. 49 years came to 2016 Shavuot. The Jews said there has to be a Jubilee year. That was, or a Jubilee, in other words, okay. So the Jubilee ended in 2017, Gregorian calendar time. And what happened this year, shortly before, listen carefully folks, shortly before Shavuot, when Shavuot, this year, May 19, May 18, 19, 20, 21, somewhere around there. And what happened? The strongest nation in the world recognized Israel's capital as Jerusalem, and the nations are now angry. You see? Okay. So let's look. Verse 25 again. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. That's happened. That's already gone. Already finished. Started in 1967 and ended in 2016. And 62 weeks the city shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after the 62 week portion shall Messiah be cut off. Okay, so there was a call to rebuild Jerusalem also from Zerubbabel. With Zerubbabel. Messiah was cut off 62 sevens afterwards. I don't care what your theologians say, believe it. They try to tell you something different. It's not true. That was the suffering servant portion, the 62 sevens, and the 7 sevens is Messiah the Prince portion. So what about the other 7? Or the other 1/7, I should say. That already happened. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city. And they did. And the sanctuary. And they destroyed that too. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Or maybe it would read, desolations will continue. And they did. He shall confirm the covenant, a covenant, with many. Nowhere does it say he's going to confirm a covenant with Israel. Titus, the Roman general, made a covenant, made a pact with his generals, with his legions, that they were not allowed to destroy the temple, because Titus was going to carry it to Rome as a trophy to put it in the pantheon for Caesar, because he planned on being Caesar in the future, and he wanted to brag about it. But he lost control. After 3.5 years of siege, he lost control of his legions, and when they broke through, they burned the temple to the ground, leaving not one stone on top of the other, in spite of what your preacher may have told you. It's already happened, already finished. It took 3.5 years, but 7 years was designated for that purpose. So the 7 years are gone. The 62 sevens are gone. And the 49 years, the 7 sevens, they're all finished. There is nothing left except repatriation of the Messiah to the holy city, Jerusalem. Now, listen to this. The nations are angry right now. Why? Because the strongest nation in the world dared to call Jerusalem Israel's holy city. So when you read Revelation 11 and verse 18, you will notice that the time of wrath, of Jehovah's wrath, comes when the nations are angry. That's the time of the tribulation upon the Gentiles. They are angry. They don't want Israel to have Jerusalem. They don't want Israel to have East Jerusalem. They don't want Israel to have the holy place. And they are angry. And that's one more sign. The time of judgment upon the Gentiles is about to come. I don't know what day. I can't tell you that. But I do know this, that what just happened today is very momentous. It's wonderful. It's a beautiful thing. But it has enraged the heathen. And everyone needs to now be careful more than ever and be watchful more than ever. We know they're not going to sit down and take this lightly. When all the heathen are angry about this, I mean the Muslims and the Christians, they're all angry about this. The haters, the children of the devil, the children of Cain, who have for the last 2,000 years or nearly so tried to deprive the Jews of their very existence. A persecution so great, it is the worst in the history of mankind, and there shall never, and I mean ever, be another one like it. So, you can choose to follow the delusions of your preachers and be taken advantage of and have your salvation stolen from you, or you can ask Jehovah, our Father in heaven, to bless Israel and send Yeshua, Messiah, to straighten things out, to sit on the throne of David in Jerusalem. That would be the right thing to do. That would get you salvation. Call upon the name of Jehovah, our Father in heaven. It is written. Joel 2. It's just as simple as that, folks. You can do this if you're a Gentile too. Verse 32. This is when the sun turns to darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Jehovah come. And it shall come to pass, that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord. Note, the name of the Lord is not going to get you saved. Go to Strong's Concordance and look it up and learn to say it. Whosoever shall call upon the name of Jehovah shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem shall be deliverance. There will be no deliverance anywhere else. These people who go and claim that that Jerusalem is going to have to suffer one more tribulation, that's false. Don't believe them. Shall be deliverance. In Jerusalem will be deliverance, as Jehovah has said, and in the remnant, that's the last generation of Israel, whom he shall call, and he will call them. And they will come. They will. Every one of them, including me.